Hello, and welcome to the Critical Path Institute podcast. Our goal for this podcast is to connect the dots among our core competencies in regulatory science, biomarkers, data management and standards, clinical outcome assessments, and modeling and analytics, and how we accelerate drug development. CPath created this podcast for researchers, clinicians, and industry and regulatory professionals with the hope that these conversations and the resources we share will advance your efforts and partnerships to improve global health.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Critical Path Institute podcast, where we connect the dots between science, medicine, drug development, and public health. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Shu Chin Ma, one of our talented VPs, who will share with us how at CPath we connect the dots between mathematics, statistics, artificial intelligence, digital technology, medicine, and drug development. Shu Chin, welcome.
Thank you, Klaus. My name is Shu Chin, and I'm one of the leads for one of the core competency here at CPath. I've been with CPath for about 2 years now.
Thank you, Shu Chin. Let's talk about your title, because your title is quite complex. You're Vice President for Quantitative Medicine and Model-Informed Drug Development. That's a mouthful. Can you explain what all that means?
Sure. So model-informed drug development, synonym for MIDD, and quantitative medicine. What we do is that we use mathematical modeling to quantify what's happening in the body and how the body responds to drugs. And using that information, we can create models, equations that can be used to create tools for clinical trial simulations. And we can look at different scenarios. What happens when we change the dosing regimen, the patient population characteristics, what's the likelihood of success, and are there more economical or effective way of designing clinical trials? So we can use these quantitative medicine methods and methodologies to increase the success of clinical trials by looking at different scenarios and optimize and test the safety and efficacy of different drug treatments.
Yes, and let's keep connecting those dots, because quantitative medicine and model-informed drug development, that sounds like outer space and science fiction. So these mathematical models are descriptions of how a drug moves through the body and how the body responds to drugs. How can you give me a tangible example of how these models help understand that better, so that you can have a more optimal way of testing if the drugs are actually working or harming an individual?
Sure. For example, right now, all the dosaging we have on bottles are fixed dose. However, you and I are different. For example, I will behave differently to a drug from you based on my characteristics. So we want to use our characteristics to describe how we can create tailored precision treatment for individual patients. And using those characteristics or equations, we can better design our clinical trial going forward, and therefore resolve some of the bottlenecks in drug development.
Thank you, Shu Chin. It seems like designing a clinical trial is not a simple matter.
It isn't.
So what are some of the questions that you need to make sure you have adequate answers to in order to design a trial to test the efficacy and the safety of a new drugs?
So when you begin to enroll patients, you want to know what the characteristics of the patient you're looking for in that particular population. You'll be looking at stage of disease. You're looking at the age, any other conditions they might have, or are they taking any other drugs. So using that, we can create a model that can help us understand how treatment can be adequately and appropriately, timely applied to certain diseases.
Yeah, that's great, because when you think about a clinical trial, you think about all those questions that you outline. How many people do I enroll? How long should the trial be? How often should I see the people enrolled in the trial? what dose to use at what frequency, all those kinds of questions. But if you look at if you think about a clinical trial has a beginning and it has a conclusion. And there's a lot of stuff that happens in between. Seems like what you're indicating is that these models can help you understand the entire movie of the trial from beginning to end, accounting for how the disease moves over time and how people take that journey through the trial. Can you help us understand that some more?
So what you're describing is disease progression. So our disease do not progress in a linear manner. It could plateau, it could accelerate at different stages. So we want to pinpoint at a particular stage of disease, how do we treat the patient adequately by tailoring our treatment? By understanding the underlying disease progression, we can actually separate actual drug effect from natural disease progression over time. And that is going to help us maximize clinical trial efficacy and success over time.
That's a really helpful insight, Shu Chin, because it seems then that in order to deem that a trial was successful, you need to make sure that you can properly test if the drug is efficacious and safe. But sometimes if the trial is not successful, it may not necessarily be because the drug is flawed, but because the whole design of the trial was flawed. Can you help us understand that some more?
Exactly. So this is why it's very, very important that we harness all the clinical trial data, because if the trial wasn't designed correctly, like you said, we might not see the result we were hoping for. However, does not mean the treatment wasn't effective. We still can glean a lot of useful information from that. By applying appropriate principles and analysis, we can actually gain very valuable information about how disease progresses over time, how we can design the next set of clinical trial to actually reveal the efficacy of the drug.
Yeah, it's fantastic because that can really help reduce risk and reduce the time
and burden
and the burden on the patients. Thank you for drug development,
exactly.
And that has a major economic impact. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes. So one of the things that we are focusing on is clinical trial simulators. What that means is that we can look at different trial design with the in silico by simulation, so we don't actually have to perform those clinical trial design, and we can pick the optimized clinical trial design so that we can see the success of the efficacy of the drug itself. And that's what quantitative medicine is about. We want to optimize clinical trial design, get the drugs to the patient safely, and expedite that process.
And that is a core competency at CPATH, because through the integration of data, then you can transform those data into knowledge. And by applying those pieces of knowledge in an actionable and ethical manner, you get to wisdom and you de-risk drug development. But it seems that there's a core theme underneath, and that has to do with variability and the sources of variability.
So we are all different from each other. And this variability makes sense and help us understand how to design personalized treatment and increase the safety of our clinical trial design.
And so a lot of people get really concerned with this word variability or heterogeneity. But it seems like the work that you do helps actually get a handle on that variability and understand where that variability comes from. And that's not necessarily bad, because then you can weave that into the design of the trial to properly account for those sources of variability. Is that true?
That's true. So uncertainty makes people worry, because it's a scary word. But if we can quantify this uncertainty and use it in our methodology to clinical trial design, it's actually very helpful.
Yes, and connecting the dots further with this whole topic of quantitative medicine and model-informed drug development, how do you develop those models? Are those all artificial intelligence models? Are those all statistical models? Are those all mathematical models? What's the difference and how do you select which method to use depending on the type of model you want to develop?
That's a very good question. So the type of model we use is also depending on the type of data. So there's various type of data from clinical setting. We can have data from lab values. We can have data from digital watches, and those are very different type of data, and we need to use different methodology and different models to fit it. And when you ask what kind of models do we use, again, what is the end purpose of it? We could be looking at, well, is it disease progression over time? Or is it there's drug-drug interaction? Or is it exposure response? For example, if I take certain amount of drugs, how will my body respond versus another person? And also time to event model. Well, how long does it take before I drop out of the clinical trial or my disease progress? So it really depends on what the type of model you're looking, the type of data you're looking at, and the therapeutic area.
And so that brings me to another dot connecting point. Seems like the core is understanding what question you need to answer so that you can work on removing a bottleneck from the drug development process, and that helps you select the method. Can you talk about the lines of expertise that your program has?
Sure, Klaus. So I have 4 teams within my function. We're matrix resource. That means we support all the different therapeutic area and consortia and areas of interest within CPATH. Our first team is AI and machine learning and predictive analytics. They look at how do we use artificial intelligence to help us select a better model. How do we analyze data properly and pull out vital data from noises? What are the models that we can use? And also digital health technology. For example, when you wear an Apple Watch, it's consistently recording everything from you. But that's over the course of 24 hours per day. That's a lot of noise. How do we extract the useful information? And the next one is pharmacometrics. And this is where the quantitative medicine comes in. We use data points to describe the human body and describe the drug interaction. Over the course of drug disease progression. And then the last one is operations, who help us manage all the different deliverable within quantitative medicine team at CPATH.
And that's a really powerful way of parsing out the different components of this big machine called quantitative medicine, because it doesn't seem like AI will answer all the questions, or statistics will answer all the questions, or mathematics will answer all the questions, but you seem to be connecting the dots within those disciplines.
So we not only collaborate with each other, we work with different functions within CPATH and also externally with the stakeholders, industry members, regulatory agency, patient advocacy, so we can understand what's really important to the target patient population.
And speaking of the people that actually have the conditions and participate in clinical trials, it's really important to incorporate their voice. Can you share some of the experiences that you've had in incorporating the voice of the people with the conditions into these highly complex and sophisticated modeling activities?
Sure. One example I can give is Parkinson's disease. It's a chronic disease without cure currently. So by hearing what is important to these Parkinson's disease patients over the course of time, the loss of mobility, trembling, etc., we can look at what data we need to focus on for us to incorporate into our model to help address that particular concern for the patient.
And in thinking about that integration of information, these models, it doesn't seem like these models, once they're developed and once they're validated and once they get submitted for review by regulatory agencies, it doesn't seem like they should stay static.
Oh, no, they are like a living entity. They are optimized over time and refined when new information comes in, so they become more robust over time and more adaptable to different trial designs.
Can you give me an example of how you've taken a model that was endorsed by regulatory authorities and then refined it and updated some more and what impact it has had?
Sure. For example, we had COVID, and then that stopped people from coming into clinic. So we incorporate the dropout model into our current existing model so that we can understand what happens when patients drop out. How does that affect the clinical trial design going forward? By accounting for those factors, we can make more precise prediction using our updated, refined model.
And those components that you added because of the pandemic was not necessarily for trials that were testing treatments for the pandemic, but trials that were going on while the pandemic was happening. And the lockdowns and the sickness may have had an effect on all trials that were going on at that time for all other conditions. Is that correct?
Exactly. So learning from one particular therapeutic area or design can be passed on across different clinical trial design or therapeutic area as a very dynamic thing where it can be transferable, the principle.
And in the integration of those principles, one other key aspect is how to ensure that everybody involved in drug development can get access and use and interact with those models. Not everybody knows how to code. So can you talk about how different layers of different models are provided to the users in different ways depending on their specific intended use and the background of the user?
Sure. So now all of us are coders, and we don't want to look at codes because that's not very useful. So what our team does is that we also develop what's called a GUI, graphical user interface, that's like an app that you can use easily. You can play with toggle, you can play with button, changing the population, the characteristics, and you can see what the predicted outcome would be for your trial design. So it makes it very easy for people the decision maker to understand what the impact of these clinical trial design simulated tools will be in drug development.
And when you develop those graphical user interfaces, do you also incorporate feedback from the users that are not coders to make sure that the interface is, for the lack of a better word, ergonomic to the user?
Of course. That's why we always want to improve. So we can hear from regulatory agency, is this something they're looking for? We can hear from the industry members, is this useful for them? They can tell us what other characteristics or what other function they would like to see incorporated in the GUI, the graphical user interface, so that becomes optimized over time.
And that continued optimization, let's connect another dot here, links to another piece of the puzzle, which is that some of those models don't necessarily answer all the questions, and some of those models can actually pose new questions. So there's a phrase called learn and confirm, or the learn and confirm paradigm. Can you help us understand how what that means and how that operates in your day-to-day?
So using the learning and confirming paradigm, that means the model is not static. So when we apply these models, then questions might be generated from these models. So we feed back those questions into the model to come up with the next iteration of models and try to apply what we learned previously into the learning. So it's a cyclic thing where we continuously learn, confirming to make sure that our model is consistently updated with the new knowledge that we acquire.
Fantastic. And do you also provide training and learning opportunities to different audiences? I heard you do some webinars and other things.
Thank you, Klaus. And this is something we're very proud of. We completed MIDD comprehensive training program with the support of the regulatory agency. And it's publicly available, and it can be found on our website.
Thank you. That, I think a lot of people are going to be interested in following that link. And just to finalize this really interesting and complex conversation that you helped us understand really well, where do you see the future of the program?
The future of the program is infinite. There's so much potential to help across the globe in aligning regulatory agency and guiding principles, updating our thought process of how disease should be treated, how we investigate, update the methodology. There's just so much potential out there.
So stay tuned for how we materialize that potential in future episodes of the podcast. Thank you, Shu Chin. This was fantastic. Thank you for taking the time to have the conversation. And I think we'll see everybody next time.
Thank you, Klaus.
Thank you so much.
Did you enjoy this episode? Share it with a friend or colleague, or leave a review on iTunes, and help others discover and support our mission. We are welcoming guests with a range of experiences and viewpoints. The views expressed belong to the guests themselves. Learn more about Critical Path Institute at cpath.org. That's c-path.org. Stay tuned for our next episode coming soon, and thanks for listening.